The monsoon is in a break in Mumbai and over much of India, and there is a nice gentle breeze. The noise doesn't seem to be too bad, so I will keep the window open so that I don't have to use the AC, which is a good thing for my little role in climate change. Anyway, the 5 I's: information, incentives, insurance, integration, and investments. Okay, this report distinguishes between the following 5 broad sets of instruments that policymakers can draw on in seeking to improve the greenness, resilience, and inclusiveness of a city's development in a world confronted by climate change. So information, of course, policies and measures to improve the timely provision of credible information that helps people, businesses, and local governments better understand climate change related risks both across and within cities, and in doing so helps promote both mitigation and adaptation. There are details, the breeze may get stronger. There are details in the sense many times personal interests, business interests, profit motives can lead to rational ignorance, so providing information doesn't necessarily lead to action unless there is a clear payoff in mitigating and adapting, for example. Incentives: policy instruments that provide incentives for individuals and businesses to internalize negative environmental externalities, as well as institutional and other types of reform that provide government officials with incentives to work better together to address green, resilient, and inclusive development challenges. Okay, incentives also include the removal of fossil fuel subsidies and other incentives that encourage activities with negative environmental externalities. So there are implicit and explicit subsidies given to make people continue to use fossil fuels or lock-in systems. For example, if you keep selling internal combustion engines and you provide gasoline easily, then people are going to keep buying those because electric vehicles may be more expensive, there may be range anxiety and so on. So incentivize have to wean out the systems that depend on fossil fuels and bring in systems that are better for the environment and less harmful to climate change. Insurance: policies and reforms that help people, businesses, and governments either to ensure that the market or to self-insure against losses associated with climate change and other environmental shocks and stresses. Integration: what does it mean? Policy interventions and reforms that promote more compact cities and better integration of cities both with each other and with rural areas as a means of facilitating adaptation through migration and trade. So urban centers require resources like food and what businesses need to sell and to build or whatever industries and so on. And this connection with the outside world is very important, and maybe also connection with other cities, so integration becomes critical. Investments by national and local governments in green, resilient, and inclusive urban infrastructure, including nature-based solutions, as well as measures to promote the crowding in of private sector in finance for such investments. I have several podcasts on nature-based solutions elsewhere, so you can look those up. There is an urban context to nature-based solutions as well, like rain gardens, for example, which will help alleviate floods during extreme rainfall events and so on. Main challenges to these: so here we are looking at low and lower middle income country, upper middle income country, and high income country, and the categories here in terms of challenges: resilience, poverty, basic services, inequality, vegetation, greenhouse gas, and pollution. So you have various levels here. So you have either moderate in an open circle or severe when it's a filled circle. So resilience can be a severe challenge to low and lower middle income country, for example, but not so much for the upper middle income country and high income country. Poverty, of course, again, it's a challenge here. Basic services are a challenge. For upper middle income country, small city size faces the issue of poverty. So there are details on how these get categorized and how the challenges are defined or quantified. You have to look up, but just get an idea that there are typologies of cities and there are steps towards making cities green, resilient and inclusive, and there are challenges to achieving those which depend on the typology of the city and including the size of the city. So looking at these 5 I's one by one, starting with information, policy options to address challenges. Again, low and lower middle income, upper middle income and high income. And here we are again. I won't go through all these challenges, but like before, we have challenges can be low and medium. So you can see here this information we are worrying about. Early warning systems, so hazard mapping assessment, build institutional capacity, decentralized land administration services. I'll read these because that tells you the details at which urban resilience can be built, monitored, assessed, evaluated for progress and so on. Participatory risk awareness, job fairs and local forums, greenhouse gas emissions inventories, pollution monitoring. Pollution tends to be a big problem and has lots of externalities in terms of health impacts. Better zoning of polluting industries, urban planning documents, urban design guidelines. These are under information. Building codes, disaster risk informed land value and disaster risk land development penalty. So the challenges, levels of challenges depend on the income and the city size again, as you can see. So let's read off before going to the second item here in the 5 I's. Let's read on defining greenness, resilience and inclusiveness. In 2021, in response to the challenges posed by climate change, the more general degradation of the environment, the COVID-19 pandemic stalled progress in global fight against extreme poverty and increasing inequality in many countries. The World Bank launched its GRID, Green, Resilient and Inclusive Development Strategy. In keeping with the strategy, this report focuses on 3 broad but closely interrelated dimensions of a city's development. Greenness is one, of course. I won't read the details. Resilience. Greenness here refers to a city's impact on the environment, with a greener city having more beneficial or less negative environmental impacts. Again, you have to quantify what you mean by impact on the environment and more beneficial and less negative impact and so on and so forth. Resilience refers to how well a city withstands climate change related shocks as measured by, for example, the total loss in input suffered and loss of population experienced. Okay, there are details like the 2 components of resilience: the size of the initial losses associated with the shock and how quickly a city returns to its pre-shock growth paths of output and population. A resilient city is one in which the initial impacts of a climate change related shocks are small and recovery is quick. Okay, there are nice typologies of resilience recovery, V-shaped, U-shaped and so on, and how you assess these and how you actually enhance resilience. Ultimately, you want to understand the resilience characteristics and you want to improve the recovery in terms of the losses and back to functionality, for example. Inclusiveness is broadly considered in terms of both ability and opportunity and outcomes. Okay, inclusion is defined as the ability and opportunity for all who reside in a city to fully participate in markets, services and spaces which include political, physical, cultural and social, as we said in the summary, thereby enabling them to lead their lives with dignity. Consistent with that definition, this report variously discusses how cities differ globally in the access they provide to basic urban services, financial services, digital technologies, and labor market opportunities. Okay, there are many details you can read. I won't go into those. In terms of where are we now? So this book then creates these parts. The first one is where are we now? So in terms of stylized relationship, each chapter starts, each part of the book starts with these kind of quotes. We need to start focusing our support, both financial and technical, on the green, resilient and inclusive transformations that will help economies brace against climate change. This is from Axel von Trotzenberg, Managing Director of Operations, World Bank Group, from April 2021. What are the main findings in part one? I'll read this and then we'll go to the next podcast, because I don't want to make the podcast too long. In terms of where are we now, the main findings are: as climate change has evolved globally, many cities have become subject to more frequent and more intense extreme weather events, most notably extreme and dry events. By contrast, extreme cold events have become less frequent. Global warming is doing that. Confronted with this changing climate, cities vary widely in terms of how green, how resilient and how inclusive they are. Nevertheless, some general patterns emerge, such as the relationship of many indicators of greenness, resilience and inclusiveness to both a city's size and its level of development. Seems intuitive, but you have to quantify those. Larger cities tend to be less green in terms of their carbon dioxide emissions, levels of air quality and average vegetation levels, but in many respects are more inclusive. They have lower poverty rates, provide better access to basic services, and have better average outcomes on many health indicators. So you can use these kind of findings to track how things will go as cities begin to get larger from a small or medium size. More developed cities also tend to be less green in terms of carbon dioxide emissions. However, beyond a certain income level, development correlates with both better air quality and a higher average level of vegetation. So people begin to worry about those things once the income levels go up. More developed cities also have economies that are more resilient to unusual weather events, and they tend to be more inclusive when it comes to access to basic services and health outcomes. They also suffer from less poverty and may have lower inter-household income inequality. Again, these are general typologies averaged globally. The greenness, resilience and inclusiveness of cities are linked. A city's level of inclusiveness is, for example, a key determinant of its resilience to both short and longer run stresses associated with climate change. Okay, so I'll leave this podcast here. We'll come back to part one. Where are we now? In the next podcast, we'll start by reading a box that summarizes some ideas or focuses some ideas. Okay.